Welcome to today's Explainer. To kick things off, I want you to picture a scene. We're going way back, right around the year 700 AD, way up in the far north of Europe. Imagine icy winds just howling across these jagged mountains and dark, endless forests. This is Scandinavia. It's the region we know today as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Now, life here, it was not easy. The winters are brutally cold, snow blankets the ground for months, and the soil is so rocky that farming is a massive struggle. Honestly, every single family was just fighting tooth and nail to survive to the next season. But, as you know, harsh environments have a way of forging incredibly tough people. And out of this freezing, unforgiving landscape came expert sailors, fearless hunters, and brilliant craftsmen who were, quite literally, about to change the course of human history. Today, we're diving deep into the story of the people the world would come to fear and remember by just one name: the Vikings.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Beyond the Horned Helmet. 2. Masterpieces of the Sea. 3. The Dawn of Terror. 4. Global Explorers and Traders. And finally, 5. Twilight of the Gods.
All right, let's jump right into part 1. Beyond the Horned Helmet, uncovering the real Scandinavia. Now, we all have that classic pop culture image in our heads, right? The giant, bloodthirsty barbarian storming a beach wearing a crazy horned helmet. Well, actually, scratch that. That image is completely made up. It turns out Viking helmets definitely did not have horns. That whole iconic look, it was basically invented centuries later by artists and theater costume designers. I know, a bit of a letdown. The historical reality is actually far more grounded. Most of these people were just ordinary farmers trying to raise livestock, or fishermen pulling a living out of the freezing northern seas, or super talented blacksmiths and shipbuilders. It was only when it was absolutely necessary that they picked up weapons and became fighters. So, at their core, they were a people rooted in survival and craftsmanship, not just nonstop warfare.
Here's another massive misconception: the word Viking itself. We use it today as a noun to describe an entire group of people. But back then, it was an action. It was a verb. It referred to going on an overseas expedition. So, to go Viking literally meant leaving your home and sailing off into the great unknown looking for trade, wealth, adventure, or just pure glory. And you have to understand where this drive came from. Scandinavia back then wasn't united at all. It was this patchwork of dozens of tiny rival kingdoms and villages. Power belonged to whoever the strongest chieftain was, and they kept that power by rewarding loyal warriors. In a world where your honor was everything, and a legendary reputation was the only way to live forever, young people were incredibly motivated to leave those rocky shores and go Viking for themselves.
Let's move on to part 2, Masterpieces of the Sea, the ultimate medieval technology.
So, what was the game changer? What actually made going Viking possible? It was the Longship. And let me tell you, this thing was an absolute masterclass in engineering. They were crafted from oak wood using this brilliant technique of overlapping planks. This made the ships incredibly light but astonishingly strong. Strong enough to literally survive the absolute worst storms the open ocean could throw at them. But here's the real genius. They had super shallow drafts. That meant this massive ship, capable of crossing an entire ocean, could also sail straight up a really shallow river, deep into the heart of an unsuspecting country. Places where big, heavy merchant ships could never even dream of going. Add to that the terrifying carved dragon heads meant to scare off evil spirits and, terrify the locals. Plus the power of huge sails combined with dozens of rowing warriors, the Longship gave them totally unmatched mobility. Because of this one piece of technology, basically nowhere with a coastline was safe.
Which brings us to part 3, the Dawn of Terror, Shock and Awe.
Okay, set the scene. It's the year 793 AD. It's a quiet, perfectly peaceful morning on a tiny island off the coast of England at Lindisfarne Monastery. This is one of Christianity's most sacred places. The monks are just going about their usual morning prayers, and then, suddenly, out of the sea mist, these strange, terrifying ships appear, vessels unlike anything anyone there had ever seen. Silently, these dragon-headed boats slip onto the shore, and heavily armed warriors just pour onto the beach. No warning, no declaration of war. They raided the gold and silver, burned the buildings to the ground, and left the monastery in total ruins. The shockwave this sent across Europe was massive. Kings were utterly horrified. The church literally declared it a direct punishment from God. With that one morning, the Viking Age had officially and violently arrived.
After Lindisfarne, the floodgates were wide open. In the years immediately following 1793 AD, these sudden, explosive raids started striking everywhere. England, Ireland, Scotland, France, Spain, even dipping down into the Mediterranean. And their tactics were brutal but brilliant, pure hit and run. They didn't announce they were coming. One minute the coast is clear, the next dragon ships are right on top of you. And because those longships were so fast, trying to escape was practically impossible for the locals. In a matter of hours, Vikings could hit a town, grab immense wealth, scoop up supplies, and completely vanish back into the sea before the local lord could even get his army's boots tied. It was this terrifying speed and ruthless efficiency that made them the ultimate boogeymen of Europe for centuries.
Moving on to Part 4. Global Explorers and Traders, a World Connected.
Now, pop culture usually just focuses on the bloody raids, but we have to talk about the sheer scale of their global footprint as explorers and traders because it is absolutely mind-blowing. Let's look at North America. Right around the year 1000, the explorer Leif Erikson actually reached and settled in North America. Guys, that is almost 500 years before Christopher Columbus. If we pivot and look east, they were navigating the massive river systems of Eastern Europe, traveling all the way down to the Middle East. They set up these massive, lucrative trade networks, swapping things like fur and iron for silver, silk, and honey. And it gets crazier. Down in the Byzantine Empire, in Constantinople, Viking warriors were so highly respected for their fighting skills that the emperors actually hired them to be their personal elite bodyguards. Think about that. Their networks literally stretched from the wild coasts of North America all the way to the deserts of the Middle East. Very few civilizations in history have ever connected so many entirely different worlds.
And finally, we arrive at Part 5, Twilight of the Gods, Beliefs and the End of an Era. You can't really understand the Vikings without understanding their heartbeat, which was their religion. They worshipped a pantheon of incredibly intense gods. You had Odin, the chief god of wisdom and war; Thor, the thunder god, who used his mighty hammer to protect humanity; and Freya, a powerful goddess of love, beauty, and, of course, battle. But here's the crucial part. They deeply believed that if a warrior died a brave death in combat, that wasn't the end. They'd be specially chosen to enter Valhalla, which was Odin's legendary massive hall. And they weren't just relaxing up there, they were feasting and fighting to prepare for Ragnarok, the ultimate world-ending final battle. When you grasp that, their battlefield tactics make total sense. To a Viking, dying in a fight wasn't a tragedy. It was basically a glorious promotion to the ultimate warrior afterlife.
But as with all great eras, things eventually change. By the time we hit the 11th century, the Viking world was fundamentally transforming. For one, Christianity was rapidly spreading across Scandinavia, which started to really alter those old, deeply rooted warrior beliefs. At the same time, all those small, fiercely independent clans were being swallowed up by larger, powerful, centralized kingdoms. And on a purely practical level, the rest of Europe kind of figured out how to lock their doors. Coastal defenses got drastically better, which meant those easy hit-and-run raids of the past became incredibly dangerous and way less profitable. So gradually, these cultural shifts and better European armies brought the legendary Viking Age to a quiet close.
Which brings us to our final takeaway. The Viking Age might have officially ended, but their influence, it never really went away. Their descendants ended up fundamentally shaping places like England, France, Russia, and Iceland. Their totally revolutionary longships forever changed the science of navigation and global travel. These were ordinary farmers, turned fierce warriors, turned unparalleled explorers, who marched out of the freezing north and just left an absolute, permanent mark on human history. So I want to leave you with a thought to ponder. Over 1,000 years later, how does that unyielding Viking spirit of exploration still influence our world today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, keep exploring.